This is Paul Moore. He uncovered a $4 billion bank fraud. He blew the whistle, and it ruined his life. This is the story of how doing the right thing destroyed a man. This is the story of how doing the right thing destroyed a man's life, and how 15 years later, he was proven right. But by then, it was too late. August 2006. Paul Moore is 46 years old. He's just been hired as the head of risk at HBOS, one of Britain's biggest banks. His job? Make sure the bank doesn't do anything dangerous, anything illegal. On his first day, Paul gets a tour of the commercial real estate division. That's the department that loans money to property developers. And his guide is a guy named Peter Cummings. Peter is energetic. He's closing deals worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Everyone loves Peter. He's making the bank rich. But Paul notices something. The loan files are thin, really thin. A developer wants £200 million to build apartments? The file is 14 pages. No serious risk assessment, no stress testing, just property values always go up. Paul asks Peter about this, and Peter laughs. He actually laughs. He says, "Paul, mate, you're new here. This is how we do things. Fast. We're not going to lose deals because of paperwork." Over the next few months, Paul reviews more files, and he realizes something terrifying. The bank is loaning billions of pounds to developers who have no money, no track record, no backup plan if property prices drop. In October 2007, Paul writes a report, 15 pages. He sends it to his boss, the CEO, and the board of directors. The report says, unacceptable risk levels in commercial real estate division, insufficient due diligence on borrowers. Potential losses could exceed £10 billion if market corrects. The report lands like a bomb, not because they take it seriously, but because Paul just accused Peter Cummings, the bank's star performer, of being reckless. 3 weeks later, Paul is called into a meeting. It's the CEO, the HR director, and Peter Cummings himself. They sit Paul down, and the CEO says, "Paul, we've reviewed your concerns. We find them to be overly cautious and not aligned with our growth strategy. Effective immediately, you're being let go." January 2008, Paul Moore is fired. 7 months later, the entire global financial system collapses. September 2008, Lehman Brothers fails. The stock market crashes. And suddenly, everyone realizes property prices don't always go up. HBOS, the bank that fired Paul, is dying fast. Remember those billions in loans to property developers? The developers can't pay them back because no one's buying property anymore. The buildings sit empty. In November 2008, the British government has to step in. They force HBOS to merge with another bank, Lloyds, to save it from total collapse. The final cost? £20.5 billion in losses. Taxpayers bailed out the bank. £20 billion. And Paul Moore? He's at home, unemployed, watching the news, watching everything he warned about come true. But here's where the story gets worse. Because Paul thinks, okay, I was right. Surely now someone will listen. He writes to the Financial Services Authority, the UK banking regulator. He sends them his original report from 2007. He says, look, I told them this would happen. I tried to stop it. The regulator writes back. They say, thank you for your correspondence. However, your dismissal is an internal employment matter. We cannot intervene. A $20 billion fraud, and they call it an employment matter. So Paul goes public. February 2009. He testifies before Parliament, the Treasury Committee, live on television. Paul sits in front of 11 members of Parliament, and he tells them everything: the loans, the warnings, the retaliation. And for about 48 hours, it's a huge story. The media calls him a hero, a whistleblower, the guy who tried to stop the crash. But then nothing happens. Peter Cummings, the guy who made the bad loans, he gets a £660,000 bonus. He keeps his pension. He retires to Spain. The CEO who fired Paul keeps his job at Lloyd's for 3 more years, walks away with a £1.4 million pension. And Paul, he can't get another job because now he's that guy, the whistleblower, the troublemaker. Banks won't hire him, not because it was wrong, but because he was right, and he said it out loud. Paul Moore spends the next 5 years doing consulting work, odd jobs, watching his savings disappear. His marriage falls apart from the stress. He did the right thing, and it destroyed his life. When I first heard this story, I thought, okay, but surely someone at HBOS went to jail, right? This was a massive fraud. So I started digging, and what I found is so much worse than I expected. First, I requested the Financial Services Authority's investigation report from 2012. It's 400 pages. You know what it says? Systemic failures in risk management, inadequate oversight. Corporate language for they committed fraud, but we're not calling it that. No criminal charges recommended. Not one. Then I found something interesting. In 2015, 7 years after the crash, British police finally opened a criminal investigation into HBOS, but not into the executives, into something else. Remember those property developers who got billions in loans? Turns out, some of them were paying bribes. They were bribing HBOS bankers with cash, prostitutes, luxury trips to approve bad loans. 6 people went to prison, but they were small-time bankers, middle managers, the guys taking the bribes. Peter Cummings, who approved all these loans, who created the system, never charged. The executives who knew about it, never charged. The only consequence Peter Cummings ever faced, in 2012, the regulator banned him from working in banking and fined him £500,000. He made the bank £4 billion before it collapsed. He was fined £500,000. That's 0.0125% of the damage he caused. But I kept digging because I wanted to know, how does this happen? How do executives get away with this? And I found a pattern, not just at HBOS, everywhere. 2008, Wells Fargo creates fake accounts. CEO keeps job for 8 more years, retires with $130 million. 2012, HSBC launders money for drug cartels. No executives charged. Bank pays fine. 2016, Theranos defrauds investors of $700 million. CEO Elizabeth Holmes actually goes to prison, but she's the exception. 2019, Boeing hides safety problems in the 737 MAX. 346 people die. CEO resigns with $62 million. The system protects executives, always. Because here's the trick. When you're big enough, fraud isn't a crime. It's a fine. It's a cost of doing business. And whistleblowers, they get destroyed. Every time. Paul Moore, HBOS, can't get hired. Sharon Watkins, Enron, can't get hired. Aaron Brockovich, PG&E, sued by the company. Edward Snowden, NSA, exiled to Russia. Chelsea Manning, U.S. Army, 7 years in prison. You know what the average whistleblower loses, according to research? 90% lose their jobs within a year. 27% face legal threats. 26% suffer clinical depression. 17% lose their homes. And here's the most depressing part. Studies show that reporting fraud internally, like Paul did, results in action less than 5% of the time. 95% of the time, the company just covers it up or fires you. But here's where Paul Moore's story takes a turn. Because in 2015, something unexpected happened. The BBC releases a documentary about HBOS, about the fraud, about Paul. And suddenly, people start paying attention again. Not politicians, not regulators, regular people. Paul starts getting emails, hundreds of them, from other whistleblowers, other people who tried to do the right thing and got destroyed. And he realizes he's not alone. There are thousands of people like him. So he starts an organization. It's called Transparency Task Force, and its goal is simple: protect whistleblowers, change the system. Now, here's what I did. 2 weeks ago, I reached out to Paul Moore. I wanted to ask him, was it worth it? And you know what he told me? He said, I lost my career, my marriage, my savings. I spent years depressed, angry. I thought about suicide more than once. But if I had to do it again, I would, because staying silent would have killed me faster. He said something else. He said, the executives who destroyed HBOS, they sleep fine. They have their money, their pensions, their reputations. But they have to live with what they did, and I don't. In 2018, 10 years after the crash, Paul Moore received an official apology from Lloyd's Banking Group. They admitted he was right. It was a private letter, no public announcement, no compensation beyond his original severance. An apology after 10 years, after his life was destroyed. That's what doing the right thing gets you in corporate America, in corporate Britain, anywhere. So why did I spend 3 weeks researching this story? Why does this matter? Because Paul Moore's story isn't unique, it's the template. Every major corporate disaster follows the same pattern. 1. Someone inside the company sees the problem early. 2. They report it to management. 3. Management ignores it or fires them. 4. The disaster happens anyway. 5. Taxpayers or victims pay the cost. 6. Executives keep their money. 7. The whistleblower's life is ruined. 8. Years later, we find out the whistleblower was right. 9. Nothing changes. Enron, Lehman Brothers, Theranos, Boeing, FTX. Same pattern. Every single time. And here's what makes me angry. We know how to fix this. We could make corporate executives personally liable for fraud. Not the company, them, their houses, their pensions. We could protect whistleblowers with actual legal protection, not just laws that get ignored. We could ban non-disclosure agreements in cases of fraud. We could make it illegal to retaliate against whistleblowers with blacklisting. These aren't radical ideas. This is how we treat street crime. If you rob a bank, you go to jail, not your employer. But if you rob a bank from inside, if you steal billions, apparently that's just bad risk management. Paul Moore is 64 years old now. He still does advocacy work. He still fights for whistleblower protection, but he's tired. And he told me something that I can't stop thinking about. He said, the system doesn't want heroes. It wants quiet. It wants compliance. It wants you to see corruption and look away. Because the moment you speak up, you're the problem, not the fraud, you. So here's what I want you to take from this. If you ever find yourself in Paul Moore's position, if you see something wrong at your company, you have to decide. Do you stay silent and keep your job? Or do you speak up and risk everything? There's no right answer because the system punishes people for doing the right thing. But maybe, if enough people hear stories like Paul's, maybe the system changes. Or maybe I'm naive. Paul Moore tried to stop a $20 billion disaster. He was fired for it. 15 years later, he was proven right. But by then, it was too late.